I'm going to give you 10 essential tips no one tells you about starting a saltwater aquarium. The tips in this video will help you with stability, patience, and more. If you know what you're getting yourself into, it's easier to set realistic goals and expectations. Let's get started. 1. Protein skimmer. I know you're going to see a lot of people saying you do not need one, but I'm going to tell you, unless you're doing a 50% water change every week or don't have fish in your system, a protein skimmer is essential. It removes dissolved organics very quickly. Just think about your fish. They have to not only live in the water, but drink and sleep in the water. Why the hell would you not remove their waste as fast as possible? If you're running a roller mat, that would help remove the stuff, but the price for one of those is almost 3 times a simple skimmer. I remember back on my first reef tank, I just had a fluval filter and no skimmer. Nearly everything I put in that tank died from a disease. I believe the lack of a skimmer and using tap water together was a death sentence. Fast forward 2 years later, I use DI filtered water and a Skilter filter, the ones people made fun of. However, I love this thing. I felt it was an absolute steal at the price of $40 back then. It removed stuff fast enough I was able to keep my fish alive for years after that. Get the best one you could afford, and it's better to have a bad one than not have one at all. After all, as long as it's producing microbubbles, organics will find their way to the collection cup. I even used the Odyssey protein skimmer one time, which also worked well, only after I added an air pump to the inlet, but still did okay. When I started upgrading to better skimmers like the hang-on back Turbo Floato, I definitely noticed an increase in performance for sure. I think you can't go wrong with a Reef Octopus skimmer. They are reasonably priced for what you get. My current one has been running for 10 years without any issues. They are made by CoralView, one of my favorite companies. Number 2. Stocking. I know the number one reason why new hobbyists fail is because they want to see a tank filled to the brink with fish. Do not overstock the tank with fish. Nature has a way to work itself out, and if you add 20 fish in your fish tank, you will not have 20 fish in 1 year. Instead, selecting fish that take up different areas like bottom dwellers, mid-level, and all-around fish, you will not lose a single fish to things like aggression and stress. This rule applies to a 10-gallon tank or even a 500-gallon tank. You'll be throwing cash down the drain, and worst part, you'll be killing these animals for no reason. My suggestion is, if you're starting a tank for the first time, say a 50-gallon, start by adding a pair of clownfish. These should be your first fish. 2 weeks later, add 2 cardinals or 2 chromies or 2 damselfish. After 1 to 2 months, if you really want, add a tank, a smaller one such as a yellow tank. They tend to not be aggressive swimmers as many other tanks, and they're much slower growers, so I definitely recommend them if you're trying to get a tank. Definitely do not add any non-reef safe fish like triggerfish, lionfish, harlequin tusk, or larger angelfish. I know these fish are beautiful, but if you plan on keeping inverse and corals, then do not waste your time. Just set up a saltwater tank with fish only. All these principles apply to that as well. Make sure your rockwork has enough hiding places for every fish you wish to keep. The more caves and tunnels, the better. Fish need to feel secure, otherwise they will be stressed, so make sure the bottom of the tank is bulky and hollow. Stay away from that negative space aquascape. That stuff is trash. Number 3. Quarantine. When I first got into the hobby, I heard I should be QTing all my fish and corals, but I wasn't, so I felt really guilty about that, like I was just doing something wrong. But I only had a 29-gallon tank and had barely enough funds to get that one started, so QT wasn't an option for me. Luckily for people today is that you could select fish that are fully quarantined and coral frags that come from hobbyists and vendors who have a strict coral quarantine. So if you don't have a QT system, just make good decisions when you purchase things. You should definitely only add animals, if possible, that have in quarantine. You want to be familiar with common pests that we want to avoid. This will help you identify them early on and possibly remove it before there is an issue. Fish parasites like ick, velvet, flukes, coral parasites like acropora eating flatworms, montipora eating nudibranchs, black bugs, red bugs, and live rock pests such as Aptasia. Familiarizing yourself with these will help you identify a problem and be able to remove it before it spreads. Number 4. Perfecting TDS, temperature, and specific gravity. 3 important parameters. For anyone starting on a saltwater tank, it can be overwhelming to keep track of 10 plus parameters. You don't need to be an expert at everything at once. A lot of these parameters have a good range that you could keep them at, so for the first 1 to 2 months, focus on becoming proficient at testing your TDS from your RODI. TDS meters can be inline or can be handheld ones. They are inexpensive and your water should always be at 0 TDS. Too often we set up our auto DI systems and think we could just use it for 1 to 2 years and it will always produce clean water. That's not the case. You want to change out your DI resin more frequently. There's color changing resins, so that's a good indicator. And then you also want to be changing out your 5 micron filter pretty frequently, and your carbon block filters depending on how much water you are making. If you really want to take it up a notch, you can get chloramine test strips, test your water after the carbon blocks, and then you know when to change the carbon blocks. Once the chloramine is getting past that, then you really want to be able to change your carbon blocks at that time. The number 2 important parameters, your temperature. Do not rely on a plug and play heater to heat your tank. That's like what we did years ago. It's the worst thing. Now consider these Inkbird temperature controllers are cheap. They work really good. They are not made for aquariums, so the price point is good. I have one running for 8 years and never had an issue. They even have one with a fan for cooling, so if you have a smaller tank, make sure to add a small fan so when it goes above say 82 degrees, the fan turns on. I feel a 1 to 2 degree swing per day is fine, but avoid anything over 2 degrees. The third parameter to get good at, specific gravity, which is the salt concentration in the water. Do not get a hydrometer. These things are trash and should be banned. You want a refractometer and a 35 ppt calibration fluid. Every time you use it, just add the calibration fluid and look inside the refractometer. If it's not set at 35 ppt, then use a provided screwdriver and adjust it to 35 ppt. Then you add a sample of your salt water and hold it up against the light, and you'll get an accurate reading of specific gravity every time. Shoot for keeping it in that range, 1.026 or 35 ppt. Once you're comfortable maintaining these 3 parameters, then focus on nitrates. A lot of people will tell you to focus on ammonia and nitrates. However, completely forgetting to mention that your TDS temperature and specific gravity are way more important, since the ammonia and nitrates will drop to 0 once your biological cycle is complete. In the past, this cycle took 4 weeks. Today, it barely takes a few days, since the addition of nitrifying bacteria in a bottle or adding established light rock will lead to you having 0 nitrates and ammonia almost instantaneously. So by testing nitrates, if you have some nitrates in your system, generally nitrates and ammonia will be at 0. So I wouldn't put too much stock on that. That's just initially, but I would not focus on that and avoid the 3 items that I'm telling you about right now, which is temperature, TDS, and specific gravity. Number 5, seeding your tank. You may think your animals just need fresh salt water at a specific temperature and boom, you're done. We all wish it was that easy. Unfortunately, there are millions of bacteria and algae fighting a war zone in your aquarium. All this leads to unstable environment in the beginning. The worst case would be an outbreak of dinoflagellates and cyanobacteria. A good case would be outbreak of hair algae, which would just get eaten or removed by you and eventually turn into coralline algae. Anyways, the best way to start a reef tank is getting good clean rock. Marco Rock and Rio Reef make good rock, but I feel all the man-made stuff is clean or dead organic, so you can't go wrong either way. Just seed it with established rock from another reefer that has good sponges and microfauna. You may have to go online for this or find a local fish club. I guarantee you can find people who would be more than happy to give you a few pounds of rubble rock or sand. Just make sure they don't have any pests that you want to avoid. A new thing has been a lot of people try to sell products that claim to get your tank mature like the wild. I find it hard to believe anything good can survive in a sealed container, so stay away from all those snake oil products. Unless it's fixing a problem like increasing your iodine, nitrates, iron, etc., ignore all that stuff. They are just trying to steal your money. Number 6, fish diet. Diet and exercise is important for all living things. Why are we feeding our fish just pellets and flake food? I know bettas and goldfish are eating this stuff, but saltwater fish need a lot more nutrients in food. If you don't pay attention to this, the fish will get stressed, get sick, and die. When your fish are fed well, they will resist disease and they will be less aggressive in the tank, leading to happy and healthier ecosystem. I suggest setting up a Eheim auto feeder and feeding small portions 4 to 5 times per day. At night, feed them a blend of frozen food at least once per day, if not more. I've used LRS Reef Frenzy in the past and loved that my fish loved the food. However, now I would say I would need about 8 packets in 2 months time, which is about $200. I can make that same amount of food for $40, so I just use lake smelts, salmon, tilapia, shrimp, and blend it myself. Number 7, export to import ratio. Make sure your export exceeds your import. I say this because it is much easier to increase your nitrates and phosphates than decrease them. I spent 8 months bringing my nitrates down to 50 parts per million. Once they bottom out, it will be much easier for me to reduce the hours my light is on my algae turf scrubber, or I could reduce the hours that my skimmer is on. In my last tank, I was able to manage nitrates and phosphates by just increasing the return pump flow rate. Having the ability to increase the export or reduce it will ensure that you have full control over your system. This concept is something that no one really understands until they experience the hair algae problems or persistent ugly looking tank situation. If you have a fish only system, you could really ramp up the export and strip all the nutrients without having to worry about the corals suffering. Since corals need nutrients to survive, fish really don't. I think the fish prefer clean water. So if you can keep everything at zero nitrates, zero phosphates, I think you'll be in good shape in a fish only system. So how to ensure your export exceeds your import? Think about it before you start. Think about the food you're putting into your tank, the amount of fish you're stocking, and how fast the waste is being removed. Waste is being produced in your tank 24/7 and should be removed as fast as possible before it can break down into phosphates and nitrates. If your skimmer is undersized, you're overstocking with fish and inverts, or you're overfeeding. This can all lead to an imbalance, which is a classic rookie mistake. Another one is new hobbyists don't tend to have testing nitrates and phosphates on their radar, so they won't even know if it's an issue until it's too late. I love Hanna Ultra Long Range Phosphate Checker and Saltwater Nitrates Test Kits. I feel they are very accurate in letting me know if I'm at zero or too high, so it's good to use these as a guide on your export. The good part about phosphate is it's very easy to remove with GFO and other means like lanthanum chloride, which I don't recommend to most people. However, unlike phosphates, if nitrates go unchecked and get out of control, it can be a battle to get them reduced. Nitrates can be handled by having sufficient biological media in the system from the start. Marine pure blocks, sand, live rock, strong flow, algae turf scrubber, refugium, a strong skimmer, and good maintenance should ensure your nitrates are always trending down and not up. It's much easier to overfeed when you need to bring your nitrates up, or dose nitrates when they drop to zero. Honestly, you should be enjoying your fish tank the first day to set up. That's a big accomplishment. The aquascape, the lighting alone gives you some major goosebumps. Enjoy the steps it takes to get a thriving ecosystem. Enjoy the fish the first 6 months. If you can't wait that long and want to add coral, there are plenty of corals that can handle those initial phases. I think the best ones are hammer corals, zoas, leather corals. These tend to be the ones new hobbyists gravitate to anyway because of the movement. But like I said, it could take a while to set up your reef tank and get it to the way you want. It usually takes a year. If you start with all live rock, you could probably get your tank mature within 6 months. That's kind of tough to do nowadays because most of our tanks are started with dry rock. 8. Lighting. I have used compact fluorescent bulbs, metal halides, T5s, LEDs, and combination of these. Everyone says corals need strong lighting. This is like saying humans need a good balanced diet with high fibers and proteins. Saying corals need strong light is misleading. If you're new to the hobby, your first instincts will be to put the most lights you can afford because of these types of comments. This is a big mistake because corals do not need as much light as we are told. I have found that corals care more about the spread of light, the duration, the spectrum, and how they are acclimated to the light. LEDs are similar to spotlights, and most of these spread is very directional, so I feel it's better to raise them 15 to 20 inches above the water surface, otherwise you'll get hot spots. If you can afford to have 6 to 10 fixtures or the newer fixtures that have a wider coverage, problems should be resolved since you can lower the intensity because you have so many fixtures. However, most people don't have 5 to 10K to burn on lights. I remember a popular hobbyist was running his tank at 100% intensity and 100% all channels on, and had an amazing reef tank. So I tried to copy him and it clearly did not work. I had to go back and lower the lights. Everyone's tank is different. You've probably heard that before, but it's so true. And without any context, it's very misleading when you hear some people are getting tremendous growth at 600 par. And if their corals are looking great, it's really hard not to try to copy them. But I could bet my money that the same corals that are growing in these guys' tanks probably started off as tiny frags growing in 250 to 400 par range before taking off. They may have also arrived in very good condition and better equipped to handle higher intensity light right from the start. The majority of these frags we are getting would do better in lower light intensities sincere. They have symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae living in their cells that need to develop resistance to the lighting, which can take 1 to 2 months. Also, you have to factor in how you are receiving these corals. If you're getting them from frag swab, generally they're probably being transported a few days before, so they're already stressed out. So putting them under a really high intensity light right away is surely a good way to kill them. Imagine what would happen to one's skin sitting on a tanning bed for 8 hours. Your skin would burn. Corals in the wild don't get that same level intensity of lights throughout the day. You're pretty much just asking them to be baking in the sun for 12 hours per day, the light intensity just being on them. Doesn't sound right, and it isn't. So I say try to keep the lighting intensity and spectrum changing throughout the day. If you're running LEDs, it's easier to mimic nature, but it's really easy just to overdo it because it's really hard for the human eye to tell if it's too much light or too little. With LED lights, it always seems like you're not giving enough light, but in reality, the hot spots in the middle are probably really high intensity light, even if the PAR levels don't show it. If you're running just T5s or other bulbs, you can alternate how long you are running them. Corals get a break. Corals also should be acclimated to lighting correctly. In the past, I made this mistake and probably stressed a lot of corals. Earlier on, I wanted to see my coral in its final place immediately. I was just too impatient, but you can't save money on dead corals. So now I much rather enjoy them 1 month from now than have them dead. Make sure the corals are starting lower in the tank and keep them there for 1 week before raising them. If their colors and polyp extensions are good on the floor, then bring them up. Sometimes they may brown. That is fine. They will come back. If you have them too high, they could bleach on you. Then you will have to do the opposite and bring them back down, something I've done plenty of times. I can tell you it's not fun. By this time, the coral is closer to death and its immune system is compromised, so it could take up to 3 to 6 months for it to come back. I currently run my 4 T5s for 9 hours per day and my Ecotech Radions on SPS AB Plus for 12 hours per day, but they're only on for 6 hours at max intensity at 63%. Which is kind of low, but I found anything higher than that would just be too much at this point. 9. Flow. Flow is not only needed in a reef tank, fish need it as well. Without sufficient flow in your system, there will be more waste buildup in your rock and sand that could lead to nutrients and algae issues. I see so many fish-only systems without any pumps, and I just can't figure out how they rely on the return pumps to provide flow. You can definitely overdo the flow, so don't go overboard with it. My favorite pumps are the Ecotech MP60s and MP40s. These pumps are great, but you still need to know where to install them and how to maximize their performance. I find using anti-sink mode on nutrient export is the best mode by far. I also find they work best if they are positioned away from each other on opposite ends, one pointing across the reef and another one above the reef. I find corals and fish prefer when the tank has calmer flow at night. Fish need to sleep and corals need to feed. When they are being blasted at night constantly, it's not beneficial. To give you an example, I run my MP60s up to 95% during the day, and at night both are on reef crest mode at 60%. The majority of new hobbyists, even if they could afford a MP40, may not feel it's a good investment since they don't know if they're going to be in the hobby for the long haul. So I would suggest getting a J-bow pumps. They move a lot of water, and I believe they may have an option to reduce the intensity with their new Wi-Fi setup. In my QT tank, I used a J-bow pump once and felt it was too much flow at night, so I just added a simple timer and turned it off for 6 hours at nighttime. I felt the corals appreciated being blasted more during the day as long as it was calmer at night when no photosynthesis was going on. I could talk about flow for hours, and there are many ways you can go, but my favorite is the Sea Swirls and Ecotech products. I also love running a closed loop, which I go over in detail in my previous videos, so check that out. I left a link in the description. 10. ATO. Finally, the most important thing is an ATO, Auto Top-Off System. This is the single most important thing that leads to stable water parameters. There is no excuse to not have one of these. Without it, your specific gravity is going to change constantly, and this change will result in a drop in every one of your parameters, including calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, and every trace element. I currently use a Hydros controller and have their ATO sensor. I used the IceCap ATO for years, and this is a great product that's pretty reasonably priced and has many features that I love. It had 3 safety features. It will beep when the container is out of water, and it will beep when the second sensor is activated. On my current system, I don't have those backups in place, so if my ATO runs dry, the pump will burn out, which has happened once already. But CoralView was nice enough to send me a new pump, no charge. On my quarantine tank, I just have a simple simple float valve in my sump hooked up to a large container. That's an easy way to do that. You could be very budget friendly, but if I had to choose something, ice cap would be the way I would go. That's the most trustworthy, best ATO that I found, and it's only $140. There you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you found anything useful in this, I would greatly appreciate it if you guys subscribe to the channel. Until next time, peace out.
Go ahead. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.